When a millionaire humiliated his disabled wife in front of his maid, he thought no one was watching. He was wrong, and the reason wouldn't become clear until it was too late. Jonathan Pierce was a self-made millionaire real estate mogul. At 42 years old, he owned half the luxury properties in the city, drove cars most people only saw in magazines, and lived in a mansion that looked like it belonged in a Hollywood movie. Sharp suits, cold discipline, ruthless ambition. From the boardroom to the country club, Jonathan Pierce was the man everyone wanted to be. From the outside, his life looked flawless. But one afternoon, everything changed. Emily Pierce, his wife of 12 years, was driving home from a charity luncheon she'd organized. The sun was bright. The roads were clear. She was humming along to the radio, thinking about dinner plans. Then, without warning, a delivery truck ran a red light. The impact was instant. Metal twisted. Glass shattered. Sirens screamed through. The air. When Emily woke up 3 days later in a sterile hospital room, the first face she saw was Jonathan's. But it wasn't the face of a worried husband. It was the face of a man calculating loss. The doctor stood at the foot of her bed, clipboard in hand, and said the words that would change everything. "Mrs. Pierce, I'm so sorry. The damage to your spinal cord was severe. You're paralyzed from the waist down." Emily stared at the white ceiling. She couldn't feel her legs. She couldn't move them. And in that moment, the vibrant, joyful woman who used to light up every room she entered felt herself disappear. At first, Jonathan played the role. He held her hand in the hospital. He told her family they'd get through it together. He even prayed with her once, though the words felt hollow coming from his mouth. This part breaks my heart, because Emily believed him. But as the weeks turned into months, Jonathan's mask began to slip. The man who once called her my sunshine now avoided eye contact. He stopped answering when she called his name. He worked late every night, came home smelling like expensive perfume that wasn't hers, and spoke to her only when absolutely necessary. One evening, as Emily sat alone in their bedroom, staring out the window at a life she could no longer be part of, she whispered his name. "Jonathan, please, can we just talk?" He was adjusting his tie in the mirror, preparing for another business dinner. "Talk about what, Emily?" His voice was ice. "About us. About what we're going to do. About how we move forward." He turned to face her, and the look in his eyes was something she'd never seen before. Contempt. "There is no we anymore, Emily. There's me, running a business, keeping this house afloat. And there's you, sitting in that chair, reminding me every day of what I lost." What shocked me most wasn't just what he said. It was how easily he said it. Like she wasn't even human anymore. Emily's voice cracked. "Jonathan, I'm still your wife." "Then act like it," he snapped. "Get someone to take care of you. A nurse, a maid, I don't care. But stop expecting me to be your caretaker. I didn't sign up for this." And just like that, he walked out. Emily sat in the silence, tears streaming down her face. The man she'd supported through every failure, every business risk, every dark moment of his climb to success, had just abandoned her in hers. What would you do if you found yourself in this situation? Honestly, I don't even know if I'd have the strength to keep going. 2 weeks later, Jonathan posted a job listing. Live-in maid needed. Must be discreet, hardworking, and available immediately. That's how Naomi Brooks came into their lives. Naomi was 28 years old, soft-spoken, and carried herself with a quiet grace that seemed out of place in a world obsessed with noise. She'd grown up in foster care, bounced from home to home, never staying anywhere long enough to feel safe. Some families worked her like a servant. Others ignored her completely. She learned early that survival meant keeping her head down and her faith strong. And faith was all she had. When she saw the job posting, She didn't hesitate. She didn't care that it was in the wealthiest part of the city. She didn't care that the pay was modest compared to the size of the mansion. What mattered was food, shelter, and maybe, just maybe, a place where she could finally rest. The iron gates opened slowly as Naomi approached the Pierce estate. Her small brown bag hung from her shoulder. Her shoes were worn but clean. She looked up at the towering mansion and felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Something about this place felt wrong. A man in a crisp black suit met her at the entrance. His eyes scanned her like she was a piece of furniture being delivered. "You're the maid?" "Yes, sir. My name is Naomi." He nodded curtly. "Follow me." As they walked through the marble foyer, Naomi's breath caught. Crystal chandeliers, gold-trimmed mirrors, artwork that probably cost more than she'd earned in her entire life. Everything screamed wealth, but the air felt heavy, cold, empty. This wasn't the kind of cold that comes from air conditioning. This was the cold of a house where love had died. They climbed a grand staircase and walked down a long, silent hallway. The man stopped in front of a tall wooden door. "Listen carefully," he said in a low voice. "Mr. Pierce doesn't like noise. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't ask questions. Do your job and stay out of sight." Naomi nodded, her heart pounding. He opened the door. Inside, seated in a wheelchair near the window, was Emily Pierce. She wore a simple, cream-colored blouse, her hair pulled back loosely. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. She looked fragile, broken. But there was something else, too, something Naomi recognized immediately. Shame. Emily turned her head slightly. "You must be Naomi." "Yes, ma'am." Naomi stepped forward carefully. "I'm here to help with whatever you need." Emily gave a sad smile. "What I need, you can't give me." Before Naomi could respond, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. The door swung open. Jonathan Pierce entered the room like a storm. Expensive cologne, tailored suit, cold, calculating eyes. He looked at Naomi, then at Emily, then back at Naomi. "You're the new maid?" "Yes, sir." "Good. My wife needs someone to keep her company since she's so determined to waste away in this room." His tone was sharp, cruel. "Make sure she eats. Make sure the room stays clean. And for God's sake, don't let her sit around feeling sorry for herself all day." Naomi's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Emily's face flushed with humiliation. Jonathan didn't even look at her as he walked out. And in that moment, Naomi knew. She wasn't just here to clean floors and cook meals. She was here to be a witness. What she didn't know yet was that heaven had sent her for a reason, and what was about to unfold would shake this house to its very foundation. Before we continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever watched someone suffer in silence and felt like you had to do something but didn't know what? That's where Naomi was, stuck between fear and faith. And what happens next? Well, that's when things start to get really intense. But first, take a second to support this story. Subscribe to this channel, hit that like button, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me, where in the world are you watching from? I'd love to know how far this story reaches. Now, let's get into what happened when Naomi truly understood the darkness she'd stepped into. Naomi's first night in the Pierce mansion, she couldn't sleep. Not because the bed was uncomfortable. Actually, it was the softest mattress she'd ever laid on. But something about the house kept her awake. The silence felt too loud, like the walls themselves were holding secrets they were dying to tell. She thought about her own story, how she'd ended up here. Naomi Brooks had learned about loss before she even understood the word. She was 5 years old when the fire took her parents. One moment she was sleeping peacefully in her small bedroom. The next moment she was being carried out by a firefighter, coughing, crying, watching flames swallow the only home she'd ever known. After that, life became a series of temporary stops. Foster, home to foster home. Some families were kind but overwhelmed. Others saw her as free labor, a pair of extra hands to cook, clean, and stay quiet. She remembered nights when her stomach hurt from hunger, when she'd curl up under thin blankets and pray to a God she'd only heard about in Sunday school. But somewhere in all that pain, faith took root. It started with an old woman at one of the foster homes, Miss Clara, who would sit on the porch every evening reading her Bible aloud. "Baby girl," she'd say, "God sees what people ignore. He hears what people refuse to listen to. And when the time is right, He moves." Those words became Naomi's anchor. When life got hard, when people were cruel, when she felt invisible, she'd whisper to herself, "God sees me. God sees me." And now, lying in that small room behind the mansion, she whispered it again. Because something told her she was going to need that faith here. The next morning, Naomi woke before sunrise and began her duties. She cleaned the kitchen, prepared breakfast, and moved through the house like a shadow. Everything about the mansion screamed perfection: marble countertops, designer furniture, fresh flowers in crystal vases. But it all felt hollow, like a museum of wealth with no soul inside. When she brought breakfast to Emily's room, she found her sitting by the window in her wheelchair, staring out at the garden she could no longer walk through. "Good morning, Mrs. Pierce," Naomi said softly. Emily turned, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Please, just call me Emily. Mrs. Pierce sounds so formal." "Yes, ma'am. Emily." Naomi set the tray down carefully. Scrambled eggs, fresh fruit, toast. Simple, but made with care. Emily looked at the food but didn't touch it. "You didn't have to make it look pretty. Jonathan won't notice, and I barely eat anymore anyway." "I didn't make it pretty for him," Naomi said gently. "I made it for you." Something shifted in Emily's expression, like she'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Over the next few days, Naomi began to understand the true weight of what was happening in that house. Jonathan's cruelty wasn't loud or violent. It was surgical, precise, designed to destroy slowly. He would walk past Emily without acknowledging her. When she spoke, he'd sigh like her voice was an inconvenience. During breakfast one morning, Emily asked him about his day, and he responded without even looking up from his phone. "Why do you bother asking questions you already know I won't answer?" Naomi, standing near the doorway, felt her chest tighten. This man speaks to his wife like she's a stranger. But the worst part? Emily was starting to believe she deserved it. One evening, Jonathan invited business associates over for dinner. Naomi was instructed to serve the meal in the formal dining room. As she moved between the kitchen and the table, she heard Jonathan's voice grow louder, more animated. He was showing off, telling stories, making everyone laugh. Emily sat at the far end of the table in her wheelchair, silent, picking at her food. One of the guests, an older man with kind eyes, turned to her. "Emily, you've been quiet. How are you holding up?" Before she could answer, Jonathan cut in. "Oh, Emily's doing just fine. Aren't you, darling? She has everything she needs. A roof over her head, a maid to help her, plenty of time to rest." His tone was pleasant, but his eyes were ice. "Jonathan, I just thought," Emily started. "Thought what?" He smiled at his guests, then looked at her. "That you'd entertain everyone with stories about your condition? Let's not make this evening depressing." The table went silent. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Naomi, standing in the corner with a pitcher of water, felt her hands shake. She wanted to say something, anything, but fear gripped her. If she spoke up, she'd lose this job, and she had nowhere else to go. Emily's face flushed red. She looked down at her plate, tears pooling in her eyes. Jonathan smoothly changed the subject, and the dinner continued as if nothing had happened. Later that night, after the guests left and Jonathan disappeared into his study, Naomi went to check on Emily. She found her in her room, shoulders shaking, silently sobbing into her hands. "Emily," Naomi whispered, closing the door behind her. "I'm so sorry." "Don't," Emily said through her tears. "Don't feel sorry for me. This is my life now. This is what I deserve." "No." Naomi knelt beside the wheelchair, her voice firm but gentle. "You don't deserve this. No one does." "You don't understand," Emily cried. "I used to be someone. I used to matter. Now I'm just this. A burden, a reminder of everything he lost." Naomi reached for Emily's hand. "Can I tell you something?" Emily wiped her eyes and nodded. "When I was a little girl," Naomi began, "I thought God had forgotten about me. I lost my parents, got passed around like I didn't matter, went to bed hungry more times than I can count, and for years I believed I was invisible." She paused. "But Miss Clara, a woman who took care of me, for a while, told me something I've never forgotten. She said, 'God sees what people ignore.'" Emily looked at her, broken and searching. "He sees you, Emily," Naomi said softly. "Even when your husband doesn't, even when you feel invisible, God sees you, and he hasn't forgotten." For the first time in months, Emily felt something crack open inside her chest. Not hope exactly, but maybe the possibility of it. From that night on, their bond deepened. Naomi would help Emily bathe, dress, and eat. But more than that, she'd sit with her in the evenings, reading scripture aloud, praying with her when words were too hard to find. Slowly, gently, Naomi began to remind Emily of who she used to be. Not the woman in the wheelchair, the woman whose faith had once been unshakable. But Jonathan's cruelty continued to grow, and Naomi knew that eventually something had to break. That moment came 2 weeks later. Jonathan was hosting another dinner, this time with potential investors. Emily had asked to join, hoping maybe being visible would remind him she still existed. Naomi served the meal, moving quietly as always. Midway through dinner, Emily reached for her water glass. Her hand trembled slightly, still adjusting to her limited mobility. The glass tipped, spilling water across the tablecloth. Jonathan's face turned red. "For God's sake, Emily, I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean—" "You never mean to," he snapped. "But you always do." He looked at his guests with a forced smile. "Forgive my wife. She's still learning how to function." The way he said it, the venom, the public humiliation, it was too much. Emily's face crumpled. She wheeled herself away from the table without a word, tears streaming down her face. Naomi stood frozen, watching it all unfold, and something inside her shifted. Later that night, after everyone had gone and the house was silent, Naomi knelt beside her bed, her hands folded, her heart heavy, and she prayed a dangerous prayer. "God, if you see this, if you hear her crying, if you know what's happening in this house, do something. Please, do something." She didn't know it yet, but heaven had already started moving. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Naomi was cleaning Jonathan's home office, a place she usually avoided because he'd made it clear no one was allowed inside without permission. But he was out of town on business, and the housekeeper had specifically instructed her to dust and vacuum every room. As she wiped down his massive mahogany desk, her cloth caught the edge of a folder, sending papers scattering across the floor. "Oh no," she whispered, dropping to her knees to gather them quickly. That's when she saw it. Financial documents, bank statements, property transfer forms, and there, at the bottom of several pages, signatures that made her blood run cold. Emily's signature, over and over again. But something was wrong. The dates didn't make sense. These documents were from the past 6 months, during the time when Emily could barely hold a pen, let alone sign legal papers. Naomi looked closer. The signatures were too perfect, too consistent, almost like they'd been traced or forged. Her hands trembled as she read further. Jonathan had transferred millions of dollars worth of assets into accounts under Emily's name. Properties, investments, business holdings. All of it moved quietly, systematically, while Emily sat in her wheelchair completely unaware. This isn't just cruelty, Naomi realized. This is fraud. She quickly put everything back exactly as she'd found it, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. For the rest of the day, she moved through the house like a ghost, her mind racing. That night, she paced her small room, wrestling with what she knew. If she said something, she could lose her job. Worse, Jonathan had power, connections, lawyers. He could destroy her, make sure she never worked again. But if she stayed silent, Emily would remain trapped, abused, used. Naomi fell to her knees beside her bed, tears streaming down her face. God, I don't know what to do, she prayed. I'm scared. I have nothing. No family, no money, nowhere to go. But I can't watch this anymore. I can't. She took a shaky breath. If this is you showing me something, then please, give me the courage to do what's right. The next morning, she went to Emily. I need to tell you something, Naomi said quietly, closing the bedroom door behind her. And you're not going to want to hear it. Emily looked up from her book, concerned. What is it? Naomi told her everything. The documents, the forged signatures, the millions being moved around in Emily's name. Emily's face went pale. No, that's not possible. Jonathan wouldn't... Emily, I saw it with my own eyes. But he controls everything, Emily's voice cracked. The lawyers, the accounts, the house. If I accuse him of something like this, he'll destroy me. I have no proof. No one will believe me. Then we get proof, Naomi said firmly. Emily shook her head, tears forming. You don't understand. He's untouchable. Men like Jonathan don't fall. They just keep winning. Not this time, Naomi whispered. Not if God has something to say about it. But Jonathan's cruelty reached a breaking point before they could act. 3 days later, during lunch, Jonathan returned home unexpectedly with a client. He wanted to show off the house, his success, his perfect life. Emily was in the dining room, and Naomi was helping her eat soup, her hands still adjusting to limited mobility. Jonathan walked in with his guest, a well-dressed man carrying a leather briefcase. And this, Jonathan said with a sweep of his hand, is my wife, Emily, or what's left of her. The client shifted uncomfortably. Emily froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. Jonathan continued, his voice dripping with mockery. She used to be quite stunning, you know, active, vibrant. Now she needs help eating like a child. Jonathan, please, Emily whispered. He walked over, picked up her bowl of soup and placed it on the floor beside her wheelchair. There you go, darling. Since you're acting helpless, might as well eat like you are. The client looked horrified. Jonathan, I don't think... It's fine, Jonathan said coldly. She's used to being catered to. Naomi's entire body tensed. She looked at Emily, whose face was flushed with humiliation, tears streaming down her cheeks, and something in Naomi snapped. She stepped forward, picked up the bowl from the floor, and placed it back on the table with a firm thud. Mrs. Pierce will eat at the table, Naomi said quietly, but her voice carried weight. Like a human being. The room went dead silent. Jonathan turned slowly to face her, his eyes black with rage. Excuse me? Naomi's heart pounded, but she didn't back down. She deserves dignity, sir. We all do. For a moment, it seemed like Jonathan might explode, but his client was watching. So instead he smiled, cold and dangerous. We'll discuss this later, he said through clenched teeth. Then he led his client out of the room. Emily sobbed into her hands. Naomi knelt beside her, shaking but resolute. That night, Naomi helped Emily do something she never thought she'd have the courage to do. They began documenting everything: dates, incidents, conversations. And with trembling hands, Emily started recording Jonathan's abusive outbursts on her phone. "I don't know if this will work," Emily whispered. "It will," Naomi said, gripping her hand. "God's timing is perfect. We just have to trust him." 2 days later, an anonymous email was sent to the Financial Crimes Division of the state attorney's office. Attached were photos of the forged documents, detailed descriptions of asset transfers, and a formal complaint about financial abuse and fraud. The sender's name was never revealed. Meanwhile, Jonathan grew more arrogant, more confident. He walked through the house like a king in his castle, completely unaware that the walls were beginning to close in. Naomi remembered a scripture Miss Clara used to read: "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." And she prayed, with everything in her, that the fall was coming soon. It was a Thursday morning when everything changed. Jonathan was in his office, on a conference call, laughing about a deal he'd just closed. The sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything felt normal, controlled, perfect. Then the doorbell rang. Naomi answered it, her heart already knowing what was coming. 2 federal agents stood at the door, badges held up, faces serious. "We're looking for Jonathan Pierce," the taller one said. "Is he home?" Naomi nodded slowly. "He's in his office." "We'll need to speak with him, and with Mrs. Emily Pierce as well." Within minutes, the house that had been filled with cold silence was now buzzing with authority. Jonathan emerged from his office, irritation written all over his face. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "Do you know who I am?" The lead agent didn't flinch. "Mr. Pierce, we're from the Financial Crimes Unit. We have a warrant to search this property and seize financial records related to suspected fraud and identity theft." Jonathan's face went white, then red. "Fraud? This is absurd. I'm calling my lawyer." "You're welcome to do that, sir," the agent replied calmly. "But we also need to speak with your wife." "My wife has nothing to do with my business." "Actually, sir, according to our investigation, several $1 million worth of assets have been transferred under her name without her knowledge or consent. We need to verify that with her directly." For the first time in years, Jonathan Pierce looked genuinely afraid. Emily was brought into the living room, Naomi by her side. When the agents explained what they'd discovered, Emily's hands trembled on the armrests of her wheelchair. "Mrs. Pierce," the agent said gently, "did you authorize the transfer of properties and funds to offshore accounts under your name between March and October of this year?" Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "No, I didn't even know about it." "Did you sign any of these documents?" The agent showed her copies of the forged signatures. She stared at them, tears welling up. "That's not my signature. I haven't been able to sign clearly since the accident." Jonathan exploded. "This is a setup. Someone is trying to frame me. Emily, tell them I would never—" And then something extraordinary happened. Emily lifted her head, looked her husband directly in the eyes, and for the first time in over a year, she found her voice. "No, Jonathan," she said, her tone steady despite the tears. "I won't lie for you anymore. Not after everything you've done to me." The room went silent. "You treated me like I was nothing," Emily continued, her voice growing stronger. "You humiliated me, degraded me, made me feel like my life didn't matter because I couldn't walk. And now I find out you've been using me, stealing from me, while I sat in this chair thinking I was the problem." Jonathan's face twisted with rage. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "I have recordings," Emily said quietly, "of the things you've said to me, the way you've treated me. Naomi helped me document everything." Jonathan's eyes snapped to Naomi, who stood firm, her chin raised. "You!" he hissed. "You did this." No, sir, Naomi said calmly. You did this to yourself. The agents moved in. Mr. Pierce, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and financial abuse. You have the right to remain silent. As they read him his rights and placed handcuffs on his wrists, Jonathan's entire world crumbled. The man who had controlled everything, who believed his money made him untouchable, was being led out of his own mansion like a common criminal. Emily watched him go, and for the first time in months, she felt something she thought she'd lost forever: freedom. Over the next few weeks, the story dominated local news. Jonathan's assets were frozen. His business partners distanced themselves. The mansion, once a symbol of power, became a crime scene, then an empty shell. But while Jonathan's empire fell apart, something beautiful was being rebuilt. Emily began therapy, both physical and emotional. Slowly, painfully, she started to reclaim pieces of herself she thought were gone. Not her ability to walk, that might never return, but her sense of worth, her voice, her faith. One evening, as Naomi helped her get ready for bed, Emily reached for her hand. I don't know how to thank you, Emily said softly. You saved my life. No, Naomi replied, squeezing her hand. God saved your life. I was just obedient. Then thank you for being obedient, Emily smiled through tears, because I don't know where I'd be without you. A few days later, Naomi received a letter. A faith-based organization that supported survivors of abuse had heard her story. They were offering her a full scholarship to study social work, along with housing and support. When she told Emily, they both cried. You're going to help so many people, Emily said. You're going to be amazing. We're going to help people, Naomi corrected, because this isn't goodbye. We're family now. And they were. Months later, Emily sat in her garden, the one she used to only stare at through the window. She'd had ramps installed, pathways widened. She could finally be part of the beauty again. She opened her Bible to a passage Naomi had shown her, one that had carried her through the darkest nights. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. She thought about everything that had happened, the accident, the abuse, the fear, the moment she thought her life was over. And then she thought about Naomi, about the courage it took for a young woman with nothing to stand up to a man who had everything. She thought about how God had seen her even when she felt invisible, how he had sent help in the form of a humble maid with unshakable faith, how justice had come not through revenge, but through truth. Emily closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude, not for what she'd lost, but for what she'd found: dignity, strength, faith renewed. And as the sun set over the garden, she smiled, because she finally understood something that took her brokenness to learn. Jonathan had the money, the power, the control, but God had the final word, and his word was always justice, always healing, always love, always. If this story touched your heart, do me a favor. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, someone who feels invisible, someone who's forgotten that God still sees them. And remember, no matter how powerful someone seems, no matter how untouchable they appear, there's a God who sees everything. And when he moves, nothing can stop him. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. And I'll see you in the next story.